So, if by some chance you do not have the stuff that we went over regarding like the Battle of Little Bighorn, Colorado, and the end of the previous chat discussion in class about the influence of the fair and on England, Japan, and Germany, and their influence on the U.S., go back to yesterday's lesson cast, which I have those in there. What we're going to cover today, briefly, because this is a longer subject, we're going to start off with this, is the election of 1876. The election of 1876 is a remarkable event, largely because it is the single biggest turnout in U.S. history for an election, voter-wise, which really eclipses what we do now, which really ain't saying much if you look at how our voting patterns go. But the election of 1896, both the Republicans and the Democrats realized that something's got to change, that the way that the country is currently running is not going to work. Both sides admit that Grant's administration is corrupt. Even the Republicans will admit that. Both sides recognize that within the space of 7 years so far, there have been two gigantic economic crises in America, largely due to Grant's ineptitude and as well as government corruption, which we'll discuss the Panic of 1873 a little bit more later on in the unit. The Republicans nominate Ohio Governor Rutherford Bertrand Hayes. Rutherford B. Hayes is the governor of Ohio and virtually unknown outside of his home state. This is primarily why he gets nominated, actually. So here's the situation. Going into the Republican convention, there were a lot of different voices about what the Republicans should do as far as who to nominate. The front runner was again Ulysses S. Grant, with probably close to a third of the party willing to support him again because he was money, baby. He was probably a guaranteed win again. The problem was for those Republicans is that the other two-thirds of the Republican Party had some measure of common sense and didn't want any part of the bucket of whack that Grant's administration had been. Now, Grant himself did not want to run for a third term, but Mrs. Grant wanted him to run for a third term. So, to happy wife, happy life, he decided reluctantly that he would put his name back in the ring for a third term. At the convention, they really couldn't agree on anybody. There were too many people with too many issues with too many candidates, and this is when Rutherford B. Hayes comes up. As governor of Ohio, Hayes had, in Ohio, proven himself to be honest, dependable, trustworthy, and willing to take on corruption, even within his own party. The problem is that really nobody knew much about Rutherford B. Hayes unless you were from Ohio or somebody really deep into Republican politics, maybe. This is precisely why he got nominated, because with nobody really knowing that much about him, there was nobody really that upset with him about anything. Nobody really that objectionable to him. So they nominated him. On the flip side, and by the way, Rutherford B. Hayes bears a remarkable resemblance to Expedia.com, I think it is, spokesman Captain Obvious, which is kind of terrifying, actually. The Democrats, for their part, nominate a governor too. New York State Governor Samuel, I look like a Sleepy Tilden turtle, or Samuel, I look like a sleepy turtle. Tilden, that didn't come out right. It's kind of funny. He seriously looks like that turtle Sheldon from Over the Hedge. You just put a shell on this guy and he looks like a turtle. Tilden was well known outside of New York, and he had made his political reputation by taking down the most corrupt political government in America, and that was the city government of New York City. And people knew that Tilden would not be afraid to take on any level of corruption and clean things up. So, the remarkable thing about this election, really, is that you essentially have two candidates who are the exact same guy. On like 90% of the issues, Tilden and Hayes see eye to eye. There's none of this awkward disagreement between them. There's none of this like radical departure. They're really both on the same page. Tilden had battled corruption in New York City. He had arrested the mayor of New York. People knew Tilden meant business. For his part, Rutherford B. Hayes had proven himself a champion of civil rights by fighting to ensure that the 15th Amendment was adopted in his home state of Ohio. Now, I would just like to point out that it's kind of disturbing that Ohio had a problem with adopting the 15th Amendment. We're not talking about like Mississippi here. We're talking about Ohio. But you got hillbillies and backwood folk in Ohio too that apparently really weren't into that idea of, guaranteeing votes for people. There are some issues in the election. There's questions regarding tariff policy and some questions regarding immigration policy. But the real issue is a non-issue. It has to do with gold. Both Hayes and Tilden agree that America needs to be on what's known as the gold standard. The gold standard is where your money is backed up by gold. You can walk into a bank, plop down cash, and you get gold in exchange right there, dollar for dollar, even Steven, swap out. Now, there is a third party in this election that is fairly significant, and that is the Greenback Party. And if you remember, greenbacks were the worthless paper money that the government forced people to use during the Civil War that you could not exchange for gold. You couldn't even buy silver with it. The Greenback Party championed the idea that the greenbacks that were currently in circulation, and there were lots of them in use, should be made legitimate full currency by backing them up with silver. So this idea of both gold and silver for your money supply is known as a bimetallic standard. Bi meaning two metals. The nominee for the Greenback Party, and I'm sorry you'll never be able to unsee this image, is this dude here, American inventor, entrepreneur, Peter Cooper. These glasses are messed up. They're octagonal, and he's got side lenses like some kind of freakish chameleon. Not to mention the fact that it looks like some kind of like sheep died on his face. I mean, in an era of epically weird facial hair, dude, this guy is like Ambrose Burnside level epically weird facial hair. You know what I'm saying?
Good afternoon. Could the following students stop in the office for a message? Nitin Agrawal, Veer Chopra, Anai Kulakanti, Avi Chopra, Violet Cornwell. Thank you.
Well, hopefully, Avi and Violet, you got your message and you went to the office. Sorry about that. The Greenback Party, though, their big issue, now we'll talk about them a little bit more in class because there's some interesting things going on with them. But their big issue is they want greenbacks legitimized. The Republican strategy in the campaign is very simple. They blame the Democrats for the Civil War. And they employ something known as waving the bloody shirt, and that literally is what they do. At a campaign rally for Hayes, and at the time that we're talking about, candidates, unlike today, did not actually go out and usually speak at their own campaign events. They had people do it for them. At a campaign rally for Hayes, a fight broke out between Democrat and Republican audience members. Some poor guy in the audience got the snot kicked out of him, and he was bleeding all over his white shirt. The Republicans in the audience literally pulled the shirt off of his back and stuck it on a pole and began waving it around, screaming, "Do you want this bloody shirt?" And people are like, "No, no, we don't." Like, "This bloody shirt is stained with the blood of every Union soldier who fought and died for you, who fought and died for America, for the Union, for the rights of slaves, to free slaves, to end slavery. The Democrats caused the war. Do you want the bloody shirt?" And they would throw this thing around, and everybody, it was a huge hit. So much so that, creepily and weirdly enough, they began carrying it with them to other campaign events and waving it around for months, the same nasty, disgusting shirt. So basically, it was, we blame the Democrats for the war. They started a war. You can't trust them. They will end all the progress and the reforms that we made and make things worse than it was before the war started. Also, the Republicans controlled the state governments in many of the southern states because of military rule, and in many western states, and they simply manipulated election results. Now, on the flip side, before we point to the moral high ground here, the Democrat campaign strategy is very simple. Republican administrations are corrupt, will end the corruption. It's dividing the nation. The corruption's the problem. And just to make sure things are kept uncorrupt, the Ku Klux Klan will be used to make sure that the voting in the South is okay. Translation, blacks are not allowed to vote. Republicans are not allowed to vote in the South. So both sides are guilty of lots of campaign corruption that the candidates themselves have nothing to do with. Okay, we'll pick this up later. Peace and love.